Now in this chapter, let's look at the Simple Queue Service. Now this is a hosted queue service that's available in AWS. Now this is a fully managed, secure and durable service. So in this service, you don't need to manage the underlying infrastructure. All of that is managed for you with AWS itself. Now you mainly use a queue service to decouple components of a distributed application, and we will look at an example of this subsequently. So how does the Simple Queue Service work? Well, first in the service, what you do is you define or you create a queue. You can then have an application or a component of your application sending messages to the queue. Now the component that sends messages to the queue is normally referred to as the producer. So the producer is the one that sends messages to the queue. And on the other side, you could have another component or another application that's actually reading messages or receiving messages from the queue. And normally this component or application is known as the consumer. So just to give a practical example of what's the purpose of using the Simple Queue Service, let's take a use case scenario. So let's say you have an application, you have one component of the application which is being used by users. Now the primary purpose of this component is to upload videos from users. So just think of the YouTube application. So in YouTube, it allows users to upload videos which can be accessed by the public. So you could have one component of an application that's responsible for uploading the set of videos. Now you could have another component as part of the application which is responsible for processing those set of videos. So you have two components as part of this application. One is responsible for uploading the videos from the users, and the other component is required for processing the videos. Now what happens if the component which is required to process the videos goes down for any reason? So you have these set of videos which have been uploaded by the users which are pending the processing. Now if the component which was processing the videos comes back up, how does it know from where to begin again? How does it know which videos still need to be processed? So all of these are questions for the component that's required to process the videos. So in such a case, what you can do is that you can actually introduce the Simple Queue Service. You can create a queue using the service. Now the component which is responsible for uploading the set of videos, in addition to uploading the videos itself, what it can do is that it can start even sending messages to the queue stating what videos need to be processed. And you would have the other component which is processing the videos to actually receive the messages. So even if the component which is responsible for processing the videos goes down, the messages are still in the queue, and those messages are an indicator of what videos still need to be processed. And this is the entire idea of decoupling components of an application. And that's why you could use a queue service such as the AWS Simple Queue Service to decouple these different components of your application. Now a further understanding in terms of queues. So you can define two types of queues using the service. First is the standard queues. So this is the normal queues which were available in AWS in this service. But lately they have also introduced this concept of FIFO queues. So FIFO queues are first in, first out queues. Now normally you would use these queues to preserve the order of messages. So if your application requires that the messages, so when you send a message to the queue, you should have the same order of messages being received from the queue in which they have been sent. So if you need to preserve this order of messages, then ideally you should be using FIFO queues. Another important aspect is the visibility timeout. So this is the amount of time a message becomes invisible after it has been read. So let's quickly understand what is the purpose of this visibility timeout. So let's say you have the producer, it's sending a message to the queue. And then you have the consumer that's going to be reading the message from the queue. Now, when a message is read from the queue, there are steps involved. So the first step is obviously to read the message from the queue. The second step is the consumer, after reading a message from the queue, it needs to process the message. It needs to understand what the message wants to convey. And after it processes the message, the next step is to delete the message. You have to delete the message because this is not automatically done when the message is read. So if the consumer reads a message from the queue, it does not necessarily mean that it would delete a message from the queue, that same message. And the reason for this is that, let's say the consumer has read the message, and before it even has a chance to process the message, it goes down. So that message has not been processed. So you should give the capability for the consumer to read that same message at a later point in time whenever it comes back up again. And that's why you have these multi-step process when it comes to reading messages. So in this series of steps, you have to read a message, process the message, and then delete the message. Now, during the time when the message is read, that message becomes invisible in the queue. So I said it's not deleted, it just becomes invisible. Now, the reason it becomes invisible is so that if you have multiple consumers, which is possible, reading messages from the same queue, you have to ensure that other consumers don't read the same message again. So there is a visibility timeout during which that message becomes invisible to other consumers. Now, during this time, it is the responsibility of the consumer to ensure that during the visibility timeout, it has the ability to process the message and then delete the message. Right, so this is an introduction to the Simple Queue service.
For more details, check the link in the description. Learn with Whizlabs. Success certified.